Brant DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, unmatched durability, and reliable components that make sure your cart is working when you are. Lead the field with DXT grain carts from Brant. Visit your local Brant dealer for more information.
Big announcement this week by China to now apply 76% tariff on Canadian canola seed. And this is a major issue. We heard earlier from Chris Davison of the Canola Council of Canada to talk about this and some of the impacts there. But let's break it down from a market perspective. We're joined right now by Neil Townsend of GrainFox, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Neil, how are we doing?
Well, under the circumstances, personally, I'm doing well, but it's, pretty disappointing trying to, navigate farmers and farmers' best interests through all of the myriad of challenges we're facing in 25, 26, including politics writ large.
Yeah. Mark, futures down heavily on Tuesday on the news. When China announced the tariff, the 100% tariff on meal and oil back in March, the market dropped, and then it proceeded to rally and actually bust right through where the price was on that Friday night announcement. Can we expect a repeat performance here?
Well, yes, it's possible. I mean, is it probable? I'm still calculating those probabilities, but the bottom line is that canola, not just in Canada, but globally, is relatively tight. And, Stats Canada gave us some more canola that had to be done. But if you just look at like 25, 26, I mean, the pattern that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years should be repeated just on a supply and demand basis, maybe in somewhat of a vacuum without the politics. But even with the politics, and we faced political challenges before in canola, and canola's done okay. I mean, maybe not as good as it would have done without the politics, but it's done okay. And I still think that if you just kind of try to balance the demand and supply for canola, you get into a situation where the last 6 months of this marketing year will be very similar to the last 6 months of the previous marketing year, where there's a bigger demand than there is ready supply, which kind of keeps the price sort of sustained. But obviously, Shaun, I mean, so many things are in motion right now. And, is China going to consume the same amount of canola? Because if they want to consume the same amount of canola, then they need to get it from somewhere. They'll be from, largely from Australia or possibly the Black Sea. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting.
What are they using the canola for? Like, are South American soybeans a substitute?
Well, I mean, they use it for a variety of things. Like, there's definitely, if you go to a Chinese grocery store in China, the veg oil section is much, much larger than it is in a North American grocery store. And a lot of the processed oils or the crushed oils or whatever you want to say, like they're advertised for different, things that people appreciate. And when I've been to China, like canola oil definitely has a space on the shelf there where it's advertised as being heart healthy. It's advertised as being, better for you, right? So there are some front of the box claims for canola oil. Now I can't, I didn't test all the oils to see if that was exactly what was in the containers. You never see soybean oil on the shelf. It's always just a veg oil blend. It's sort of the lowest common denominator. Now, obviously, a lot of the stuff is used in sort of like, industrial purposes or food processing. The one other unique aspect of canola, and I'm not an expert in this field, but aquaculture. And in fact, when they wrote about canola being banned, aquaculture was mentioned in all of the articles, sort of that it originated from the press in China. And what I've been told about the aquaculture is that it's both aspects, both the meal and the oil are used in the aquaculture. And the one thing that I remember speaking with members of this about 7 or 8 years ago, members of COFCO in Beijing and talking about the aquaculture. And the one thing they said to me was that the juvenile fish mortality rate was much lower if they used a feed mix that included the canola as sort of one of the main ingredients in that fish food. So, that's an economic aspect to it. And with the mortality rate, I mean, I assume maybe they'll keep using it, but, again, they can adapt. They have extra crushing capacity and they have a lot of abilities to kind of,
Yeah.
show resilience when they're faced with, something that costs too much, right?
Do, does Australia have the supply to make it happen for them? And what does that mean? What does that mean going forward for canola exports?
Yeah, I mean, if Australia wanted to solely export their canola production to China, I mean, they would probably just have enough to like satisfy China's, import demand, what they did in 24, 25. But that would mean that, all of their other countries that they were exporting to, Australia would no longer be able to service. And of course, Australia is sort of, we don't know exactly what the growing season is going to be like in Australia for, September, October and November. So, I mean, if they end up with like a shorter crop, which they've ended up with before, that could also sort of intensify the thing. The other thing is the Australians, they don't really carry over canola or anything to any great regard because of, the environment down there. It's sort of a just-in-time delivery service. They harvest it and they ship most of it to the ports and then get it on boats and out. So, I think there is an opportunity for Canada, at least say like, it's 2.5 million tons, let's say that Australia incrementally puts back into China. And they haven't been exporting to China for some time. They've just got a few test cargoes so far, but let's just say it's 2.5 million tons. I mean, that 2.5 million tons would have to come from somewhere because there's some uncovered demand at that point. So Canada will backfill that. And even if we backfill 80 or 90% of that is some mitigation. Right now, a lot of those markets, people will argue, are not as premium as the Chinese market. Maybe
Right.
more sailing days, a little bit more costs involved. But the net impact of that is that Canada. It's not going to be a zero sum game exactly, but we're going to be able to export more to other places.
One of the ironies or coincidences here, Neil, is at a time where, from a trade perspective, we've heard the prime minister say, hey, elbows up and trade diversification. We're actually becoming more reliant on the U.S. market when it comes to canola potentially.
Oh, 100%. I mean, like you mentioned the elbows up and the trade thing, like there is a bottom line issue here for Canadian farmers. And this covers a lot of areas, and particularly for Western Canadian grain farmers. Like we need market access, right? And, we've been talking about this probably since the very start of your career in agriculture to the start of my career in agriculture. And I think there was a moment there, maybe, in the, 2015, 2014, where we thought, okay, things are going to be better. Market access is going to be, trade seems to be very popular in the world. People want to trade. People are understanding, that there's advantages, like Canada can grow canola better than some other places and that kind of thing. But here we are in 2025. And, if I'm just trying to make a plan as an analyst, and even if I was trying to make a plan as a farmer, I mean, do we really know what the last 6 months of this marketing year will be like politically? And with China, I think Canada needs to get this resolved. We need to sit down with China. And I mean, is it, like who are we protecting if we have 100% tariff on Chinese EVs? How big is that industry in Canada that we're protecting? And are we actually protecting something that's really more US based? And the US is antagonistic towards us right now. So I think it's obviously like a multivariate variable, system right now. But I think with China, we got to get to a system, or we got to get to a place where we become trade partners. Like we need these other countries, and even with the energy that we're producing on the West Coast, or be able to access off the West Coast, like from Alberta mostly. But China is going to be one of the main markets for that. So shouldn't we have a better relationship with China? So I think there's some compatibility here. Now, final point. One thing that always strikes me with China and Canada is I don't think China thinks they're dealing with an equal when they talk with Canada. I think they think like Canada is a little bit annoying and they should fall in line and do what China wants. And one aspect of the way Donald Trump is treating Canada is that reinforces that idea to China. China is always aware of what's happening in the press, what's being said from the White House, and sort of the way that, we've been just verbiage about Canada from the US and Trump. It's just being very disrespectful and doesn't exactly, if you were just compiling articles, you'd say, well, is Canada really that important? Like the US is saying they're not that important. And I think on the canola front, on the world spring wheat side, and pulses and energy and a lot of other things. Lumber, like Canada, is very important. The only problem from a Canadian perspective is we absolutely need markets to ship those things to.
Great stuff. Neil Townsend, GrainFox, based out of Winnipeg. Neil, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
For the latest ag news, agronomic advice, and more, check out realagriculture.com and RealAg Radio.